Hey everyone, and welcome to An Operator's Blog. In this episode, we will be discussing the differences and similarities between building products in Silicon Valley and India. Joining me for this episode is Suhas Motwani. He's the co-founder of The Product Folks, India's #1 product community with more than 180,000 members. Suhas is also a founder, a builder. He has built a suite of productivity apps, a notable one being Indistract, which has more than 1.2 million downloads. Suhas is a very, very old friend. He was an early customer of my startup as well. And I've really seen him emerge as a young leader, a thinker in India's product and startup ecosystem. And the reason why I'm excited to have him today for this topic is Suhas has been spending a lot of time in the Bay Area in the last 1 year, really trying to bridge the US-India corridor, very similar to me on the investing side. He's trying to do the same on the product and founder side. So super excited to have you, Suhas, for this discussion.
Likewise, Tom, thank you so much for inviting me. Like I think I always tell you, Workomo was definitely a product that needs to exist, and I hope someday you bring it back. But excited to see that you've taken on the investing lens. I know you've been thinking about it for a long time now, and I'm really glad it's shaping up the way it is. There need to be a lot more people solving the cross-border problem, and I'm like very happy that you have capital as well along your side to just back amazing founders. So very excited for your journey, and excited to see the pod and the blog coming along great as well.
So are you ready?
Absolutely. So yes, definitely.
Okay, let's get right down to it. So Suhas, over the last 1 year, you've been doing a bunch of these immersive treks in the Bay Area, right? Um, Talk to me about them. Why are you doing these? What have been some of your high-level observations during these trips?
200%. I think two main reasons. One, I think my first trip last year was long pending. It's something that I've wanted to do forever. Growing up here in India, you feel the valley is at least a destination you want to go once, see all the cool stuff that's happening, right? So that's something that I always wanted to do. Second, I'm currently splitting time between building in the productivity space. And productivity is a category. All my current paying users are mostly from, the other side, mostly from the West. Second, I know a lot of VCs are spending lots of time for their portfolio building corridors between two continents. One where you see a lot more building activity, one where you see building as well as a lot more buying activity. Right? North America is probably globally the largest software buyer. So if you are building a B2B SaaS product, you have to be there today or tomorrow. On one side, I think productivity led me there. But I realized that outside of the venture ecosystem, it is very, very necessary for community builders like us to bridge ecosystems. And one point led to the other. I think today, one of my co founders in the community is based out of Berlin. I'm shuttling between the Bay Area and Bangalore. So just like we were jamming, I think this triangle, not just this corridor, but this triangle is going to be very important in the coming years. And we feel we can play a small part for the larger ecosystem, just a very small part, helping founders, helping operators who are exploring these ecosystems and just create bridges between these. So Bangalore, Berlin, and Bay Area is where we think we want to spend a little bit more time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I love the fact that you have converted the corridor into a triangle. So
Right.
yeah. So I'm going to carry that thought with me. Any high level observations? I know we'll get into the details of product management and startups and what founders are doing in each of the ecosystems. But any kind of top 3 high level observations just over the last 1 year?
I think number one, especially, I'll be more contextual to the lens that I've been seeing it. There are certain categories which haven't yet opened up in India, which I feel there is a paying market outside India. So I think that is something a lot of builders need to start taking cognizance of. It is easier to get started here. Most buyers, right? We have our networks here. We know a lot of people. We feel we can get early acceleration in India, and even I've been through that journey, right? So all of us get started here. But you'd realize that the market, if you really want to build a business out of it, your market is probably much larger outside, where the buyer persona is slightly different, or sometimes maybe very different, right? So if you have the opportunity to get started in a market like that already, you'll definitely save some time. That is number one. Second, my observation was that US as a market is definitely a lot more mature. This I'd say from just interacting with a lot more senior operators. And second, also if you just compare pure today, I think most products that you see coming out have a layer of AI. Numbers wise, in the last quarter, and this is I'm quoting an article from Economics Times. In the last quarter, almost $27 billion was invested in AI startups just in the Valley. Versus this number, if you want to take a guess, in India was just $8 million. Of course, I know there are deals happening that that I know, but these aren't public, right? So I'm just sharing the data that's probably available in the public, and you see that this disparity shows in the ecosystem, right? Of course, there are lots of energy, lots of good builders here as well, but the entire ecosystem needs to come together at the right time. And if that support doesn't come through, it's going to be very difficult, right? Like we can keep saying in India that okay, hey, we don't have a foundational layer, for example, right? We don't have an infra layer. We are only an applications play. Maybe that's true, no doubt about it. But then I think we're just going to be playing two very different games. And just like the cloud era, is this something that we want to miss out on? Is the bigger question here, right? So I think these are two main learnings that I've had, and I'm also trying to index and try building more on these, right? So the first point was very directly to what we're building at Indestructible. We're trying to spend more time in a market that is paying us, trying to build more products for them. And the second point then ties up more into the community that, hey, while capital is one thing, what else is missing? Can we go double down, help the ecosystem in our small ways, right? I'm not sure how much of a needle we can move, but we're hoping in the long term, more bridges, more help for founders beyond capital is something that we can bring to the table.
Yeah, no, two very interesting observations. I think the first one, it reminds me of two podcasts that I recently recorded. One was with Rajan, who runs Upekha, which is kind of a cross-border US India cross-border accelerator, and then last one was with Vinod Muthukrishnan of erstwhile Uniphore. I think he's just joined. He's come back to Cisco now,
Yeah.
and both of them said the same thing that look, you got to as a 0 to 1 founder start, or at least attempt to start in the market where your customer is, right? And then we have seen enough cases, I've seen that as an investor as well, that if you end up spending too much of time building for a different ICP, which is usually kind of the local ICP in India, it can actually send your product roadmap down a completely different direction. And you
Yeah.
actually then land up in the US, let's say 12 to 24 months down the road, and you're like, man, I'm an idea stage company here. Because
Yeah.
as you said, the customer here is much more mature and the requirements are so different.
Exactly. And both the individuals that you mentioned, I think in their small ways, both are playing a very integral role in bridging this gap, right? I think everyone needs to step up and everyone needs to. There's lots more to do in this corridor, just from. And yeah, I think you've got two great individuals before this who've been there, done that at scale, right?
Yeah. I think the AI part is also it's very interesting, right? I mean, I think obviously, as I mean, both of us know, right? Again, all these big dollars are going in because I mean, the rightfully so. I think Silicon Valley and the US overall is typically the leader in terms of capex build out, right? Like all the dollars are going in to build out all this infrastructure on semiconductors, chips, and then going on to kind of the infrastructure level software and then applications. I think, and as you said, I think and this is again something that we discussed in the earlier, AI for India podcast, where we netted out that look, it's unlikely or it's low probability that Indian startups will be able to take a lead on the infra side, on the platform side, but applications is definitely something that lends itself well to the innate strengths of Indian founders. I think there is now kind of we have more than a decade of precedence now in terms of Indian founders being able to go deep into vertical SaaS, sort of take areas, go deep into them, and really kind of leverage whatever capabilities are out there to solve problems for customers and provide great customer support. I think what keeps me up at night is that typically every wave, the real value gets created by narrative violations.
Yeah.
So we all are obviously thinking in this direction. It's almost like a consensus view. And then
Yeah.
suddenly out of nowhere, I will not be surprised if in the next 5 to 7 years, some Indian founder comes out and builds some sort of a localized infrastructure play. And that's where all the value ends up getting created. So that's what's keeping me up at night as an investor.
Yeah, no, that'll be very interesting. My only hunch, right? Again, since we are making slight predictions on where we're going, I still feel maybe it would be an Indian founder. Might be an Indian team, but definitely having one co-founder in the valley, it is almost impossible for us to build this completely from India.
Yeah.
But like you said, if you're taking a 5 to 7 year horizon, um, things could be very different then, right? I think the pace at which things are changing is something that is very surprising. So I'm failing to even look forward 7 years. November 2022 was when ChatGPT launched, right? We're not even 2 years into this, and
Yeah.
just imagine the number of products that have come out, and on top of this that are doing good revenue, right? So yeah, 2 years. If you're taking a 7 year timeline, that's 4x the amount of time that is just passed. So yeah, just think of 4 other cycles like this if you're thinking of just November 2022 to today. So it should be very interesting. I think acceleration is something that is very hard to foresee. Things just go past you, and you know I think these cycles are just going to increase the speed at which you can build out prototypes, build out products today. And since we mentioned application, especially on that layer, I think the speed at which you can iterate today has definitely gone much faster. So
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see how these models play out, business models play out. But speed of execution of building products has definitely got faster.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, to round up that point, I think just interacting with a lot of even Valley VCs and founders, I think Eric Schmidt recently gave a talk at Stanford as
Yeah.
well, right? I think my TLDR is that nobody really knows what's going to happen.
True.
So just brace yourself as a founder, operator, investor, somebody who's working in a company. You just have to brace yourself for massive change. I can feel it in my bones that we are actually sitting on a change which is probably much more bigger and much more redefining for our lives, not even our careers, for our lives that we all can
True.
actually imagine right now.
Absolutely agree. I think it's good that you gave this as a disclaimer in the beginning of our podcast. Everything that we're saying out of this, we're making the best of our abilities to join some dots based on our own experiences. But it is super hard, like exactly what you mentioned. I think it's going to be super hard to see exact. I mean, if you can predict that, then you're probably sitting on a gold mine, right?
Perfect. Moving on, you run India's largest product community. I think you've probably spent time with thousands of product managers and product leaders in India. And now, over the last 1 year, I know that you have spent a lot of kind of in-depth time with product leaders here in the Bay Area. What are the ways in which you have seen they are different, and also in ways that they are similar in terms of personalities, in terms of their approaches, in terms of the way they think, right? Every aspect of just being a product builder.
One interesting observation in the valley was that a lot of product leaders at senior positions are also Indians, right? So that was very interesting for me to see that hey, the diaspora is actually very deep. And my experience is only from the valley and a little bit of New York, right? I haven't seen too many other ecosystems in the US, right? I know Seattle has a very deep ecosystem because of the large tech presence there. I know Austin is picking up, but I haven't had personal experience there. But this was one very interesting for me to see. Spend some time with senior leaders across both big tech, right? Your Googles, Microsofts. Fun fact, I think the Microsoft EVP, even though the team is in Seattle, but he works on the Microsoft Teams product, right? He is actually based in the Bay Area. Like if we are building a product that is for communication, we should be able to dog food our own product, right? So again, Indian, right? Some very senior people across the ecosystem. That was one very interesting point. So that also helps you build this corridor, saying that hey, there have been people who've gone 3 decades, 4 decades before you. They've set up that ecosystem. Is there a way we can get them involved, right? Many of them are looking to give back to the community. So if we can get very interesting early stage builders here, match them to senior operators there, that is the bridge that a lot of us can contribute to. Second, maybe moving a little bit into the differences, is the valley felt a little bit more mature to me. I'd say talent is on both sides, great talent on both sides, right? Gone is the time when you could call India a services nation, right? And that, hey, we need to see more products coming out of here. Every product you name there, many product, not every product, but many products that you name there, you'd have an equivalent here with, a similar design sense or even better in some cases. So in terms of tech, in terms of design, in terms of UX, we are there, right? UPI as a product, billions of transactions. You cannot see something like that anywhere else in the world. Quick commerce written off across the world. Zepto today at a $5 billion valuation and only increasing. executing here. So talent is definitely there here. Only one thing is I feel like in the valley there's slightly more mature thinking in terms of slightly more mature in sense second order, a little bit more long-term thinking. Could be because of the products they are building, slightly more global consumer products that you're seeing coming out of the valley. Could be because they just started building software products at scale much before we've seen, right? So it could be just a factor of time um, and experience, right? You get to work on products that are used across different. So I felt like there is a little bit more maturity um, in terms of just the thinking, but lots of senior leaders coming back to India, working with India startups here, bringing that culture back here. That is getting embedded, right? So I think it's going to be very interesting seeing that cross pollination also come, not just from founders going there and trying to sell in the valley and trying to set up teams there. It's also going to be the other way around, where senior leaders have worked decades in the valley, now want to come back, maybe closer to home, contribute to startups here. That cross pollination is also going to be very interesting. So I think both on similarities and slight differences. These were, I think, some very interesting points that I noticed on a recent trip there.
And just double clicking in terms of their product building philosophies, right? Like founders as well as product leaders in companies tend to be, some people are more design led, some people are more distribution led. I recorded a podcast with Rohini where we were discussing Square's philosophy, where it's not just about building great products. It's you have to also stress test in parallel whether there is a business to be built around the product, right? So everyone has different kind of frameworks and approaches. Have you seen any contrasts between how product folks in India approach it versus kind of what you have heard in the last 1 year from kind of experienced leaders here and how they approach building products?
There were certain nuances which I think have gotten much more closer in the last few years. If you consider a wave that was there in say 2015-16, I don't think there was as much focus as an ecosystem in building design first products. But today, pick up any consumer product here versus there in the valley, 1920. If not, sometimes you might find a better functioning product, much cleaner looking interface in India versus that in the valley. There have been instances, right? So I'd say that point of discussion where, okay, hey, we weren't focusing so much on design. We were just trying to get things done. Indians are more jugadu. All of that is true. But historically, I think India has grown on principles more on the West, right? We haven't followed what's happened in China. We've rather followed what's happened in the US. And I think we've gotten up. If you ask me, in a 15 to 25, 9-year time frame, I think it's very hard to differentiate today. In the valley, I showed people, I opened a Swiggy app and I showed people. I opened some of the other apps, of course, like geotags, so I was not able to go to too many other screens. But from whatever I showed them, a lot of them were pretty surprised on the the quality, the functionalities that are there. So I think that sense of, okay, hey, are we leading with design? I think that we've crossed that phase. If you ask me, I think that is definitely a phase we've crossed. A lot of products that you see in India are still ops enabled tech, right? The larger companies today are still ops enabled tech versus a lot of software first products that you see in the US, the leading, right? If you see top 5 market cap, if you see the kind of companies that are there, tech companies that are there in the US versus in India, I think that is one stark difference. So yes, there have been instances where lots of decisions are first made on, hey, they should work first, right? And then everything else can follow, because the problem lies in solving the ops, where tech is a layer on top. Unlike the valley, where maybe you'll have to invest a lot more first on building that product, that software product that actually, and like you said, the valley is a lot more mature ecosystem. You cannot go back um, with the Dropbox example, right? The Dropbox case study was, okay, hey, I'll put out a waitlist with a nice little product video, and overnight they shot up to like 75,000 subscribers on the waitlist, right? Great example for its time, but no one in the valley would probably attempt something like that today. I mean, you have to be a little bit more sophisticated. I think we passed those times. So I think Vijay Raipati from Atomic Works said this in a much better way, that we have crossed the stage of an MVP. MVP in its traditional sense still is needed, but your end consumer, your end user, your buyer has already seen that first version. So your MVP in traditional sense will not work. It has to be a slightly more full-fledged product that they can use, they can feel, they can see instant results, not just a functional prototype.
That's a great thought. And one of my observations, I mean, my entire venture investing thesis is predicated on the global Indian founder, right? Which is founders from India building for the world, as well as the diaspora here. And my observation has been you literally take the same founder, same background. If that founder is here in the valley, there is a tendency for them to pick up deeper problem statements, more challenging problem statements, really push themselves. And I think one of the words that I've been playing around with to define this is having more courage, right? Versus that same founder in India is sort of, maybe it's kind of access to risk capital at that early stages, maybe being a little afraid of the gestation periods, maybe not having role models of that. I think, so just carrying forward your point, right? Of, hey, is this kind of an ops driven, tech enabled product or service versus kind of really taking on deeper engineering problem statements, right? And especially really visible on the enterprise software deep tech worlds, right? Which is where kind of I play.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's changing. Like exactly what you mentioned. Actually, it's a very interesting observation, right? How much of a factor does environment play on just the founder mindset, right?
Yeah.
I'd love to, like, maybe you should definitely do a more deep dive on just that one topic. If you have case studies of founders who've just changed geographies, I know a lot more. Given that now, I think a lot more founders are applying for an O1 very early, moving base, taking that plunge. Next couple of years, you should see strong examples of exactly the statement that you mentioned. I think that's a very interesting observation on how much of an impact an ecosystem can play on your growth journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think the classic reason that's always been given is, hey, be close to your customer. But what
Hmm.
I'm netting out to, especially in kind of the recent years of my experience, is it's actually that enabling ecosystem. It's actually the presence of role models, right? And I'm sure the similar thing applies to somebody, let's say, moving from a Trichy or a Coimbatore to Bangalore, right?
Hmm.
Where you just get exposed to a different quality of founders with different quality of thinking, and just your peer group, I mean, everyone is just thinking and is showing courage at a different level, right? So it's just a softer element. Yeah, the business side is of course self-explanatory, that you need to be close to the customer, you need to understand them better, build trust with people, fundraising, this, that, right? But I think there's this softer element, which, as you said, I think it's super important.
True. True. Yeah.
uh, Perfect. No, this is great. So actually, that UPI point, and I think quick commerce, I think there has been a lot of curiosity. I'm sure you felt it as well, right? Around the success of the quick
Yeah.
commerce model in India, right? I think it's becoming like a case study for even Silicon Valley companies. So I want to
True.
take that on, right? I think there has always been this ecosystem question around, hey, there's a Silicon Valley way of building products, what India and even other ecosystems can learn from it. I want to actually reverse that question and say, what can Silicon Valley learn from India's experience of building products, right? What Indian founders and Indian companies do really well.
I think if I were to just pick one point, I think we're a very resilient bunch, right? How much ever we are talking and we're normalizing, yes, you can build a product here, come and sell in the US, right? We're talking about it so normally. If you break it down, it's actually very, very hard. It takes you so much courage to first build out a product that's equivalent, go into a market where you probably know you're an outsider, right? Let's accept it. You're an outsider to build relations to sell. So you're building first a better product than that's something that's already available. You're figuring out an arbitrage. You're going into a market where someone has at least 3 decades of relationships or 2 decades of relationship, working relationship. You're going in there challenging an incumbent, or you are, taking someone else head on. Takes a lot of time, effort, energy, right? So I think in one word, I think we're a resilient bunch in general, and that comes down to even the models that you see come out of here, right? Product management wasn't even a thing, I think, maybe a decade and a half ago, right, in India. Whereas in the Valley, you'd see someone who's been doing product management for more than 2 decades, right? There aren't so many examples in India, right? We have, in fact, we do a conference every year, right? So go through LinkedIn to see, okay, hey, what are some new names that are coming up, that are coming up, that are coming up? It's just mostly a similar lot that you see here, because it takes time for an ecosystem to mature, right? You can't do much. So I think in the short period that we've had, right, and I'd say for this generation of products, Flipkart probably was where I would benchmark the start of product management. Of course, some smaller company, not smaller, some much larger company, but started just a couple of years before that. But around that age is where I see product management really being a thing. Right? So if you see in history, that's just about 10, 15 years. And in the first few years, it was more about, okay, hey, how do we even get this thing done? Say if we have to sell a book online, right? How do we have to get it done? It wasn't on the focus wasn't on, okay, hey, how do we really build the best UX for our customer? But today, a lot of products that you see already have this built in. So in the short period that we've grown, I think a very, very resilient, but both domestic and from product builders slash founders trying to build or trying to take up cross-border assignments just like this. I think it just boils down to the grit that some of these folks have shown. And the testament again, like I mentioned, the UPI example, right? It has just changed so much for the ecosystem. If you were to ask me to name one product, I know tons of great products, but at the scale, what UPI has done in the model that it has done, right, as a PPP, I think that is something that is definitely should be a case study globally.
I think what you highlighted earlier really resonates, which is I think the capability of Indian founders and Indian companies to really build these very operationally complex products, right? Now,
Yeah.
it's not just a software product in a lot of these cases. It's actually an overall omni-channel experience. It also brings me back to, I think, my Alibaba days, and I saw a lot of this in China as well, right? Which is it's fairly hard to execute a lot of these models, and I think the number of models, such models now that are succeeding in India, it's fairly non-trivial. So that I think is something which is I think the whole world can probably learn from some of these case studies. I think the second thing I actually recently wrote a post on, do Indian startups have a right to win in robotics, right? Because that's industrial robotics is a big area of focus for me as an investor. And I was looking at all the right to win elements that India as a software destination has had since the 90s, then moving on to products, then moving on to SaaS, right? And then one element that stood out to me was the ability to provide really white glove customer support, right?
Mhm.
And I see that even in my seed stage portfolio companies where the kind of customer support and customer delight that even a seed stage US
Exactly.
India founder is able to drive, right? Let's say with a manufacturing enterprise customer here, it's
Yeah.
unheard of, right? And
Exactly.
it feeds well to obviously the economics and kind of I think our DNA. And I think as kind of people who grew up in India, we are used to dealing with very, very tough customers, right? The Indian customers probably are the hardest customers. But that strength translates so well irrespective of technology, irrespective of whether it's consumer or enterprise, right? I think that's
Yes.
one of the core strengths of grounds up Indian founders.
100%. I think the point that you mentioned on that support bit and DNA, you think I've started to believe that comes a slightly more cultural also. If you see, we are a very hospitable nation, right? And they say, Atiti Devo Bhava, right? That actually comes down to something like this, and then comes the arbitrage play, right? Because when both come hand in hand is where the entire economic model becomes slightly more in our favor. But that was a great point which comes on the daily side. By the way, I have one question since you mentioned, and I know you spent considerable time at Alibaba. If you take an AI lens, right? We spoke a lot about US, India, and some numbers that were there in the public domain. But I've always felt, and now your lens is you're based in the US, but keep interacting with founders here. If you take China, India, and US, given that you've had that lens, uh, what is it that we are doing different, or what is it that we should be doing different to really catch up in this race?
I mean, look, China is, I think the geopolitics has changed things a lot, right? I mean, I was in China operating there, literally like going there every month and literally living out of there for almost
Interesting.
5 years when I was driving global expansion for Alibaba. But that was a different point in time, right? Like globalization was at its peak. I think China was deeply integrated and at very different kind of political terms with all major economies. I think now that's changed, right? So, and really, frankly, I think it's very hard to get a real insight into what's happening on the ground there, right? But I can tell you, at least from my days there, that I think AI is, of course, a massive sovereign priority for them. I think their big tech companies and their tech founders are supremely talented, supremely focused. Their operating and execution culture as a nation really lends itself well to moving fast on things, right? And which is, I think, a massive competitive advantage that they have. Now, whether they can actually create their own IP, I think those are kind of question marks. Honestly, if there has been this kind of whole notion that the US, of course, has a head start on China, and then China will struggle a lot on this front. I think a lot of that is is overblown. I think China has invested a lot in its
Exactly.
domestic R&D capabilities over the last 2 decades. And, I'm having worked in one of the bad companies and look at what Baidu and Tencent and all these companies have done. I don't think any of these Chinese companies can be underestimated, right? From just a pure capability perspective. So that's, I think, China. I think from an India perspective, I think India is playing it in the right way. I mean, we have to, I think, be really very strongly aligned with the Silicon Valley ecosystem. I think there's a natural alignment of values of the way of doing business. I think it started off, of course, in the 90s, and through the last three waves of sort of services, products, SaaS slash cloud, and now kind of going into AI and deep tech, right? I think that alignment has only grown stronger. I think it is supported by very strong geopolitical alignment between both the economies and both the countries. So I think that plays very strongly. I mean, now you are seeing, kind of working groups being created in defense, for example, between both the countries, right? And India is now emerging as a very strong defense tech country.
Yeah.
We are seeing a lot of effort happening on energy, EV, manufacturing side, right? So I think India is kind of playing a lot of those cards at a macro level in the right end. I think US, as you said, it seems probabilistic that in US will be the one who will actually create the infrastructure for a lot of this stuff, right?
Right.
And so India most likely will need to build on top of it, right? Like India slash Indian founders, right? So it's
Yeah.
actually in our interest to sort of understand these platforms, iterate on these platforms. A few people will kind of immigrate and start companies here. I think the US is doing a lot to kind of encourage that immigration, right? I mean, you see the O1 visa. I think that's been a big tool as well, right? From this perspective. So yeah, I think just having very strong alignment, really piggybacking and building on top of all these infra capabilities that are being put out, and then of course I think the entire narrative, potential narrative violation in all this is that can India, or is there a need to build a localized AI infrastructure company out of India, right? Which is I think probably what
Mm.
Bhavesh is thinking about today.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I think time will tell, but it's going to be interesting. I think in my honest opinion, just from the recent visit, I think I was there 3 weeks back, maybe. Um, maybe it played out very similar in the SaaS wave, right? Maybe these waves are such that it starts maybe in the West, and then we take a couple of months or years to take a stance first of all, and then build out certain layers, right? Like in this case where everyone's like, okay, hey, maybe applications where we need to go, right? So it could be possible that that is the general nature of some of these waves. You mentioned the four waves we've seen, right? But just from an ecosystem point of view, I don't think that is something we can sit on, right? Like, okay, hey, applications also, in all honesty, there are so many applications already being built in the US as well, right? So where is the arbitrage? In that case, okay, hey, applications is something we can build. Where is the arbitrage in applications as well, right? In the services play, the arbitrage was there, very clear, right? SaaS also there, right? Certain, like most of it was pricing. If you see the early SaaS that came in, most of the arbitrage was on cost and pricing, right? Um, and talent, right? Essentially, that allowed you to bring down some part of pricing, and products only kept getting better over time. You see, some of these products that came out were much better. Now, where does the arbitrage lie? Where you're saying, okay, hey, we will build applications. We're not going to touch foundation. We're not going to touch infra, or at least we're trying to, but we might not be able to compete there. But yes, we will, fight on applications for every single application. I mean, the US, every YC batch, right? I'm not saying foundational or infra come out of it. Yes, a little bit of infra, but 90% of the batch is doing applications, right? Is there really a differentiator there? Is definitely the question mark there. I mean, I think we need to accelerate. You cannot just sit
Yeah.
on, okay, hey, we're going to do application, and yes, we'll kill. There has to be a path. If that is how it happened historically, and that is what we're relying on, then maybe we play the application game, but we play it at 10x, because right now it doesn't feel like that in this ecosystem.
And that I think that's a great question to ask. I think my POV on this as an investor is that I think the time of building incremental application companies is gone. I don't think
Hmm.
that's going to survive. I mean, irrespective of competing with US companies, YC companies, I think global companies, I think it's going to be trivial to build a lot of application layers. So I think you will have to go deeper. That's why my thesis is I'm very excited about kind of the so-called deep tech areas. And really what deep tech in my head means is really picking up specific domains and going at the L2, L3 level in those domains, right? So
Yes.
you are seeing robotics, you are seeing manufacturing, you're seeing energy,
Yeah.
space,
Yeah.
defense, materials, right?
Yeah.
So really picking out these and these are huge TAMs in the
Agreed.
US, right?
Agreed.
Agriculture. for example.
Yeah.
And that's the thought analysis I try to do in that post, which is pick up industrial robotics and say, okay, why should, to your point, what is India's right to win? Why should India build a robotics company? And what I
Right.
netted out to is that a lot of those advantages actually lend itself well, because the big problem with taking on these domains is that there are huge gestation periods. The
Yeah.
products are very complex, right?
Yeah.
Which is where I think India's kind of talent arbitrage, cost arbitrage, the ability to provide customer support
Yeah.
goes deep, and the ability of Indian founders to globalize, right, to move out
Yeah.
into different geos, go deep into a domain. So I was like, okay, I think the right to win is actually looking pretty good in a lot of these
Mhm.
new areas. So I think so I call it non-incrementality, which is I think Indian founders, especially in the US India corridor, have to think about non-incremental startups, right? If you're thinking incremental SaaS, hey, let me just build another Gong or let me just build another new type of CRM, that's not going to work.
Exactly. I think that's a great way to think about it, right? Most of those sectors have historically, because of longer gestation periods, also have been historically not the first options that even venture has touched, right?
Correct.
Maybe it is probably today where we start thinking, okay, hey, this is where the opportunity lies, and whether smaller or longer cycles, we just need to go back there, right? And maybe funds like what you're doing, and a couple of others in the ecosystem, maybe we'll see a step up on some of these, and then um, it goes both way, right? First, capital follows talent, and then talent definitely jumps in. So as soon as you see a slightly uptick in that way, you'll see a lot more, and it's already happening, right? Great space tech, defense tech, robotics. At least three out of the five that you mentioned, at
Yeah.
least you're seeing a lot more activity here.
Yeah.
And hopefully in the other two, you'll see that uptick in very very recent cycles. So I think I love that thesis that you're going behind, right? I think
Yeah.
it's high time maybe that becomes, and that could very well become a differentiator where we really don't need to compete on other fronts and rather take lead on in some of these.
Great. So moving on, I think we have spent a lot of time on product. Now I want to actually tug the strings on your other superpower, which is community building. You're probably one of the best community builders I've seen globally. If you contrast the US versus India, what are the differences in terms of building communities, leveraging communities also? And it could be as a founder, it could be as a creator. I want to kind of keep it open, right? What are some of the contrasts?
Similarities and contrasts, both. Again, one of the similarities that I mentioned on the product side is something that you see here as well. Um, just given the nature of maturity in this ecosystem, you'll see brand communities being very very strong. Everyone investing. Event-led growth is so huge in the every single SaaS company is at least thinking about a lot of these things. Just maybe as a function of time, we're still seeing lesser of that here, but it's definitely coming, right? So that would be on the similarity of between product management and community management, right? This is definitely, and also similarity in the ecosystem, right? That one is the more mature product ecosystem. Hence, you see a lot more investment also happening in community, especially SaaS companies. You see a lot more community involved, right? So that is from one point of view. Um, a differentiator and maybe a small rant is I feel a lot I feel like a lot of community builders in the US take pride in what they do. I feel more community builders in India need to step up and take pride in what we do, right? Nothing that we do is any easier than it is in the West, right? So if it can be seen as something so integral to selling cycles, to community, to relationship building, to getting insights from the ecosystem, um, then I think, and maybe again, it could be a function of time that here, as the ecosystem here matures, people will look at it. But I think we need to stop looking at it from the lens of, okay, hey, it's just something that can be done on the side, right? Ki, yeah, matlab in Hindi that you say that haan ban jayega, right? It is not that. It is very very integral. As much time that you spend in product building, um, in building and selling, you need to invest in a community a little bit more long term, whether that is your own brand community or you partner and work with others. I think that is going to lead us to a lot more opportunity that we tend to miss out on, if we want to play larger games, right? We've definitely scaled from an India point of view, but I feel that is one of the larger differences just from community management here versus there. And I know some great community builders, but it's just that when the pie or the larger pie itself is tinier. um, in the US, you often find founders so excited about that, hey, This is something that needs to exist even before a product exists, right? And I know new age founders here are investing on this from day one. So that's why I'm very bullish that it's just a matter of time. Um, but there are some of these playbooks that a lot of SaaS companies here are starting to pick up, right? Event-led growth. You'll see a lot of great early stage startups, SaaS startups from India now trying to replicate. Community playbooks starting to replicate. It's great that at least in this ecosystem now there's a lot more education coming into it. Lots of these playbooks that are getting shared, a lot of knowledge, right? I still have bookmarked a tweet that Naval had done in 2019 saying that getting great software engineers on your team is hard, no doubt, right? But you know what is rarer than finding a great software engineer? It's a great community builder, because there are no playbooks or there is no school for teaching community. And this he tweeted in 2019 before the entire Web3 wave picked up, or these SaaS playbooks were out. So I think the good part is at least lots of these community builders in the West have started to write some playbooks. Every market is different, every market has its nuances, but at least if you can pick up some of these learnings and iterate for your market, right, adapt it to your market. Lots of I pick up a lot of ideas from some of the conferences that I visit in the West, and then try bringing some of these experiences to this ecosystem, and then everyone else then piggybacks on it. So on one side, lots of gratitude for people who are openly building their sharing, mentoring, helping out. I think people have been very, very kind on that front. Yeah, I think I'm just waiting. Given just like everything else, I'm hoping this market matures here as well.
So I know you mentioned Naval's tweet where he said that there is no playbook for community building. So I want to put you on the spot. And so let's say for a seed stage founder in India operating in the US India corridor wants to build out a community or start building out a community in the US, what are the three very, very practical things that they can do?
Right. I think, see, very early when you are, maybe at a seed stage and you aren't very convinced about, hey, whether I should do this or not, because you have to spend time, energy, money on, if you are very serious about a community, you need to spend time and energy, right? So at that stage, if you feel like, okay, hey, I don't have either of these three, or even I don't have, one or two of these three, start getting involved in the community, right? If you see the global ecosystem, the world is going private, like communities. Twitter was one large community where people met each other, right? But today, the actual conversations are now happening on group chats. It's not happening on Twitter anymore, right? I think Sriram from A16Z has a great thread on this, right? And even before that, Elad Gill had hosted the founder of Figma, Dylan. That podcast is available, and even the transcript is available online, where Elad had asked Dylan on, okay, hey, if today you were to go find or involve yourself in community, what has changed, right? And in early days, he mentioned the same point that, okay, hey, there was a lot more communication happening on Twitter, but today everything is moving to private chats. So unless you have the time and energy to start, and I'm taking private chats as a reference to your own community today. If you don't have the time and energy to build your own community, it's okay. Take your time. We can do it at a later point. But figure out where does your customer base lie, right? There is definitely someone who is nurturing a smaller community, a group chat, an event. Open Luma, see what is relevant, where is your audience, and go contribute to them. It could be as simple, right? If you see someone building a community for customer support representatives, right? There are very, very tiny things you can do to contribute, right? You could just subsidize their Slack bill, for example, or Zoom bill. Just pick up a SaaS product that they contribute, say that, hey, I'll contribute to this. Leave that to me. $50 a month, $100 a month might not be a large thing for you. It's great to support that community. These are just tiny things that you can do. Don't go change everything. Don't try giving your gyan there. Just try getting embedded. People will notice that. Like the biggest point you don't realize, you don't have to be the loudest person in the room. Pick up the broken points and solve it permissionlessly. No one has to come and give you a laundry list of, okay, hey, whether I should do it. And I know you already have 100 things on your plate. You don't have the bandwidth and energy for this. But trust me, not even in the long term, in the medium term, this is going to come back to you, right? Then you realize, okay, hey, maybe I have a little bit more budget. Maybe you've raised enough money. Start getting involved in dinners. Start getting involved in events, right? The easiest way is, okay, hey, maybe you could partner with two other companies for whom the ICP is very similar to what you have. Get together, do dinners, And there are much larger events happening every month in the valley, right? You had RSA the month before that. You had another conference that just came through. You had Databricks doing the summit. Now you have the entire SaaS wave coming in September, right? Pick up these big events, do small dinners right around that. If it is relevant to your audience, split the bill with two others. Easy way to get started. Next step, okay, hey, and this is very easy to do, right? These are things that anyway you need to go out there, you need to build relationship with your customers, you need to sell to them. Take it step by step, start contributing, then partner up, then you realize, okay, hey, there is value in creating my own IP, right? Even before I go and build my own um, community around this, right? Pick up an IP. Some of them do it by calling it like a World Product Management Day. For example, if I'm building for product, figure out similar IPs, right? It could be annually, it could be biannual, based on the effort that you want to put. That way, you'll be able to attract the right set of people and your brand growth. At that point, now you invest. Okay, hey, my content has picked up. There are people that are relevant to me. Can I engage with them deeper? That is where your community. So there's a step-by-step process by which you're like, okay, hey, I don't have enough time and bandwidth to invest in something like this from day one, but I have little bit time, little bit energy, little bit resources. I get involved in step one, step two, step three, and then at some point you'll realize, okay, hey, there's lots of value in this. Get someone to help you, external. Then build an internal team, right? Then start doing more frequently. Some of these activities more frequently. Build rituals. Help people within that community, right? End of the day, the best way to even sell your product is building a relationship and solving a problem. If you can solve a problem for someone, other things will fall in place, right? So if you can do that even before selling, everyone's going to start recommending your product, right? Everyone talks about, hey, how do I get word of mouth going? One of the hardest things to first of all do, second to attribute or measure, right? Community is a great way to, if community done well, most of your other problems get solved. Early stage product, you need to start getting feedback. Beta community helps. You need to tomorrow go out there, figure out who your ICP is, break the ice, build relationships with them. Community helps. You want to start kicking off some of these referral campaigns, you start getting word out there, right? Even when you're launching, say, on Product Hunt and you want support, who's going to support you? Your community is going to support you, right? So I think people just discount the fact that, okay, I'm going to put everyone on one group and I'm going to let them chat with each other. That is community for me, right? I think it's time for us to start taking a more nuanced view on each layer of community and how it is going to directly contribute back. I'm not saying invest in something and then look forward to 2 years, right? Don't do that. Be very, very, very thoughtful about how much time, bandwidth, energy you have, and there are a step-by-step approach. Today I think these playbooks are available out there, and that's why I was very, very thankful to a lot more people who've done this in the past and then are very willing to share this with the rest of us.
I love this philosophy of permissionless contribution, right? Like going out there without any agenda and try to solve the problem of the community first, and sort of giving before expecting things in return, right? And I think if you give
Yes.
enough, you sort of get it back. I think a couple of tactics you mentioned reminds me of what some of my previous guests have said as well, right? So I think SpendFlow has done really well on curated dinners. It's been a
Yeah.
massive go-to-market leverage for them. And I recorded an episode with their marketing team on sort of going into the deep dive of the tips and tactics of doing a
Okay.
successful curated dinner. Second is, I think, Bucci, who's the founder of Levo, he mentioned kind of doing community demos, right? In cybersecurity, right? So how do you kind of connect with other founders, other startups in the same way? So they're like, look, there's one day where everyone just comes and kind of demos, right,
Sweet.
their products. And I mean, these are such simple things that I don't think they require that much effort.
Exactly. In fact, this is a great tip. This last point that you mentioned is very, very related to not just cybersecurity. Every week, every fortnight, every month in the valley, whenever Indian founders are visiting, there's definitely someone who's organizing a demo night, right? Whether that's a VC, whether that is Llama Lounge, whether that is different event. Go to Luma, check out who, especially if you're in that pre-seed where you're just getting your product and you want to start demoing it. Go ahead, try with the larger partners, see if you can get LinkedIn workflows going, but don't miss out on these opportunities, at least when you're early. It's not just cybersecurity. This is a great point for lots of folks to keep an eye out on. You just don't know who is in the audience looking at your product. And if you can do a great demo, many times that inbound kicks off conversations, at least kick off, right? Whether that converts into a paying customer or not is only depends on how good how good of a problem you're solving for them. But it has worked, right? People will come back and talk to you. Okay, hey, this is very interesting what you're building. Can you tell more, right? That is how inbound will kick off you.
This is extremely, I think, practical advice on community building. Coming to the last question, and this is actually my favorite question because this is something I've seen you do really well over the last 1 year. I mean, you have connected with such marquee founders, operators, investors here in a very short period of time. And as a US India venture investor, I see a lot of seed stage founders being in a similar situation where they kind of land up here, fairly new to the ecosystem, not too many relationships or networks from the past. Looking for customer intros, looking for investor intros, trying to even hire locally here. How have you gone about kind of doing relationship building so effectively? And what are some of the things that kind of new US India founders can do as they arrive in Silicon Valley to quickly and effectively build these connections and sort of really drive outcomes out of this?
No, I think that's a great point. I think I'm hopefully only getting better at this, but I'll share three things that have helped me. One thing is we already had existing um, product operators from India who moved to the Valley. I think that was a starting point. So try finding common points, right? For me, that was product folks, but for a lot of people, it could be alumni networks from colleges, schools that you've been. Start there. Then you would have worked across multiple organizations in the past. Some of these folks will be in the Valley. I think these are very strong starting points. These are people who can open up doors for you. And that leads me to my second point where most people want to help you. It's just that people make it so hard to actually I think a lot of people just make it so much harder to help them, right? What I mean by this is you need to do the hard work before asking someone for help, right? Many people are more than willing, and especially I think this is very true for both Bangalore and the Bay Area, that people want to help. You just need to remove the friction from something like this. And I'll go a little deeper into that, saying that you cannot walk up saying that, hey, this is what I'm building. Can you connect me to someone? Right? That's very generic. If you can craft a really interesting forwardable, right? It has the right hook, it has the right numbers, it has what is in it for that other person to actually get on call with you, right? Make that interesting. First of all, if that is not interesting, even if they forward it, however close they are, it might not work, right? So point number one. Second, be very clear about, okay, hey, if that other person's giving you their time, make it worth their time, right? And third is remove friction from it, right? When you're asking for this intro, exactly who you want it, how much time you're here, how urgent is it, why do you want it, and okay, hey, this is a very very small concise forwardable that I'm sending to you. If you have some time, please could you share it ahead with XYZ because I want to connect for ABC reason, right? I think removing friction has helped a lot. And I think the third point is something that you mentioned very very briefly, but go with the mindset of giving at some point taking, right? um Not easy to do in most situations, mostly because for a founder that's traveling from India, we only come in for a couple of days or weeks and then we're back here, so we try to maximize that. One thing I've learned is many of these relationships aren't one time. These relationships are much longer than you think, right? And however the ecosystem is, it's still very tiny. So try to figure if there is a way you can break the ice and bring them on your side. um, it is not a one-time transaction. You're not just going there 30 minutes, and no one really sells on the first conversation unless it's a product that you build that is either super pressing need someone has. um, yes, be direct, no point. Like if you have a need of, I'm not telling anyone to be indirect in any sense, be very direct. But at the same time, there is something that in most conversations there is something that you can help with as well, right? So if you can figure out a middle ground, and I know this is contextual, right? Many times there are different dynamics, where being direct helps a lot more than what I'm mentioning here. But in most other conversations, people are there to help you. Um, if there is any way that you think you can help, lead with that. If not, be very courteous, be very, no one's asking, no one's expecting you to, do a give and take. None of them who are coming on con. A lot of them are just coming to pay it forward and respect that. But also keep them in mind where you think at any point. I think real relationships are built on that respect and just people helping each other out. I think building relationships has been about helping each other out. I think for me, that has been one thing that I've led with, and I think that just so many people that I feel like I met on the first time that I came there, that I met second now, where relationship just gets a lot stronger. So think slightly more longer term. Lot of interesting people in the valley who want to help you out. Yeah, try to make it less transaction as possible. But if you think leading with something as direct, people actually don't want you to beat around the bush. So don't do it just for the sake that, okay, hey, I'm saying that, okay, do like give and then take. So you're beating around the bush. People don't want their time to be wasted. Most times with very senior people, you'll get only 30 minutes. Make the best use of that also, right? So be contextual. Don't just go with the fact, okay, hey, that, okay. Even if you don't have anything to contribute, don't force fit it, but go with that mindset. There are many opportunities that you might not think too much about it, but if you're actually cognizant, if you join the dots well enough, I think that's where the other person also feels great about a conversation like that.
Now, this has been an amazing conversation, Suhas. I think what I'm taking away from this discussion is I think both Silicon Valley and India product ecosystems can learn a lot from each other, from each of their unique strengths. I think that's one. And I think second is just the power of communities, both for founders and for anyone, frankly, I think out there in today's day and age, but also for bridging the US-India corridor. So thank you so much for taking out time for this episode, and also for all the work that you do in general in both the India, US, and now, of course, the European product ecosystems, and also, I think, particularly in the US-India corridor.
Thank you so much, Sam. This was fantastic. I don't think I've spoken too much about these topics anywhere else. So thanks for curating this discussion, and hopefully do lots more together to bridge these ecosystems. So again, congratulations on going down the path that you've always wanted to, and I'm really excited seeing how this pans out for you.